All right, our next presenter is Terry Eagan. Terry Eagan, for the past year and a half, he has been the operations manager for the Special Collections Department at the University of South Florida, where he assists researchers in locating their topics of interest. Prior to this position, I worked for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission for 18 years in a hybrid librarian project management position. Much of the work at that time involved a geospatial component to answer patrons' questions. Based on that experience, I try to apply GIS skills in my current role, such as crafting story maps and using other geospatial tools to enhance our collections. Terry Eagan.
So thanks for having me here today. One of the things that I was approaching developing this story map was dealing with things like these, which we have in the library. These are basically, they're called Hollinger boxes, but it's how we store our archival records. And it's basically records of people, their lived experiences, love letters, travels abroad, their flight plans from when they bombed on bombing missions in World War II. How do we take that and make it in a meaningful fashion in a context-driven tool? So we've developed story maps, and I've tried to apply some GIS data when I found granular data that I could make a stronger tool or a stronger case. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is this War and Society collection. Has anybody been to the special collections at USF ever? Okay, cool. So I got a few of you here. So yeah, special collections is on the 4th floor of the Tampa Library. There's 5 main collecting areas we currently collect on. Floridiana, so Floridiana, anything related to Florida. Has anybody heard about the Cuban Sandwich book? Okay, so the Cuban Sandwich book was co-written by my co-worker, Andy Hughes, and he and 2 other authors went to Miami. They went to Spain. They couldn't get to Cuba, but it's basically the history of the Cuban sandwich. Who has the correct Cuban sandwich? What makes one Cuban sandwich better than the other? It's a great book. It's Christmas time. Buy it for your family. The other thing we collect at USF Archives, so anything the university generates in the course of its business, we collect. Childhood literature, or children's literature, I should say. We have a big collection on that. The Florida Environmental and Natural History Collection is something we collect. And then we also collect LGBTQ materials. Having said that, in the past, we had a strong collection on science fiction. So if you're interested in science fiction, we've got science fiction from around the world and also the works of science fiction authors. And we also collected a Holocaust and genocide literature. And much of that material is what's going to be driving this special collections tour on War and Society. So you see the picture, you can kind of see here, he's wearing the armband, identifying him as a Jew in the Warsaw Ghetto. We'll see more of that later on as we scroll down. But one of the first things we have is World War I. We cover World War I with this rather long set of letters, 47-page letter Ben Stern sent to his sister at the end of the First World War. And what's interesting about this, and I don't know if anybody can get a handle on what's interesting about just looking at the first page of this letter. I was thinking about this earlier today and I realized something important about it. Anybody have a guess? Like in 20 years, will people be able to read this letter? So one of the things we have to think about in special collections or in the archives is that we're going to have to transcribe this letter and much of our manuscript material that's handwritten because it's no longer being taught, or if it's being taught very briefly in schools. Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War was had a huge impact on Europe. Also had a huge impact in Tampa, West Tampa, and Ybor City. We had a large population of Spanish and Cuban immigrants. And when the Spanish Civil War took off, they enlisted, they raised funds. So I'm going to take a quick tour onto this. So that top photo up at the left is volunteers who've raised money to send ambulances to Spain. This is a map. First time I got to use some real GIS skills was finding an example. This is a map that appeared in a 1930 anarchist magazine that's online in black and white and grayscale, and I replicated it. But it shows you the election breakdowns and what eventually triggered the Spanish Civil War. So here's when the war began, the battle lines of the nationalists and the Republican forces. I checked out probably all the books on the Spanish Civil War in the library, trying to find a decent map of where the battle lines were at the start. No consensus. It was just too fluid of a time. So you just kind of make your best guess and draw the map as you can. And then the response, they had lots of fundraisers that would come through Tampa, raising money and enlisting support for the nationalist forces. They also had some charlatans that came through that I learned about that were soliciting funds for the same cause, and then they just disappeared with the money. In the late 90s, we had a researcher here who went through and talked to the children of people who participated in supporting the Spanish, or were active in the cause of the Spanish Civil War, and they did oral history interviews. The oral histories interviews are available through our Digital Commons website, but also the audio of the conversation. It's really cool because a lot of these people have passed away, but you can listen to the audio here in certain excerpts that I made recounting specific incidents. And these were called milicianos. They're like Girl Scouts for the cause of the Spanish Civil War. They go to parks, they'd parade, they'd raise funds, and it was just basically a social / political activity for them. This was found so we've got records for the Centro Asturiano, which is a social club in Tampa. We've got all the records, and buried in one of the records was this magazine put out by the Spanish Press Service, and it's a propaganda piece. So it basically talks about how bad the one side was as opposed to the other and all the things that they were doing. And then this was a very famous song, No Pasaran, that was sung at battles. It was written by either someone who was from Tampa or who lived here for a time. And we've got the sheet music in special collections as well. And then Guernica. Are you familiar with the famous Picasso drawing or painting for Guernica? I think it's in the United Nations when the Republican forces bombed the civilians, and that triggered a big outcry in the city of Tampa with the Latin population. And then there was this march down 7th Avenue at the time. Lots of people were calling because the United States position at the time was not to be involved. So even though one side in the Spanish Civil War was allied with Mussolini and Hitler, we were not at war yet in World War II. So the FDR administration didn't want to take sides. So there were lots of signs like this that were put up in shops throughout Tampa asking to lift the embargo and let the Republicans get their weapons. And then that's the end. That was like the final battlefront. The green are the Republican forces. They took over. This is an interesting letter that I found buried in the archive. It was written from somebody to the Centro Asturiano social club, talking about their experiences as a volunteer fighting for the nationalist forces, and just complimenting the bravery of the Spanish soldiers at the time. I'll scroll down to the very bottom. This was something I pulled off this Spain's website. Spain and Cambodia are the two countries with the most number of unmarked graves of bombs of undisclosed. There was such a war, and even when the war ended, the fighting continued on both sides for another decade. So there was action and retribution, cycle after cycle. I'm sorry to bum y'all out before lunch. So that's the Spanish Civil War. Now we're going to go into World War II. So this is really cool. If you go to the USF library, you'll see this guy's drawings or extracts from letters he wrote to his wife, framed on some of the floors and also in the stairwells. Alvin Yorkunis, he came, I forget where he came from, I think Ohio, but he went to UT where he met his wife, and you can kind of see the drawing he's making of the UT Spartan sharpening his axe. He was an excellent cartoonist and illustrator, but I don't think he ever pursued that as a career. But when he enlisted in the service, he would send his wife, his girlfriend, then his wife, these extravagantly illustrated letters every day. So we've included just a sample of them in here. There's one, the MP about to hit him over the head. And there's an example of, you know, the types of material he would put together. He ended up on Guam in 1945, stayed there for a little bit of time, took a lot of photos of the liberators. And that was it. We ended up, when his wife passed away, she gave us all his materials. So if you're waiting for the GIS, here comes the GIS. Here is Raymond Lorenz. So Raymond Lorenz flew B-24 Liberators in World War II. He had a daughter that was attending USF in the 70s, and at that time, he donated his material to special collections. So he would take photographs or use the camera operator to take photographs of his bombing missions. And then after each bombing run, he would write notes as to what actually happened on that run and date it. Since we know his bombing group, what membership of the Air Force he was in, where he was based out of, we were able to geocode all his bombing runs. So here's an example of one of the letters he wrote on Budapest. And then here's an example of the bombing run hitting Italy. And then after the bombs were dropped, and they go to Bucharest. And then, I don't know how well you can see it, but there's this little, yeah, you can see it. A little field that they used to fly out of. It only lasted during the course of the war. I tried to look it up, but they said after the hostilities ended, they just turned it back over to the Italians and it was destroyed. But you can see he flew, or they flew pretty far afield. These are all the different bombing missions, and these are the ones that are able to identify that based on his own notes that he did. So he went all the way down near Athens into the oil fields of Bucharest, which my coworker Andy, who wrote the Cuban Sandwich book, also knows about World War II history, said that was like the lifeline for oil for the Third Reich, and that was one of their targets. And then all the way up to Hungary, near Vienna, and then adjacent to Switzerland. And it was either on this bombing mission or on a subsequent bombing mission. In his notes, he talks about how he asked his compatriots, you know, do you want to go back to Italy, finish fighting the war, or do you want to just take a break in Switzerland and stay in Switzerland? And they're like, no, we'll go back, we'll finish the war. It's like, okay, well, it's your choice. So here's documenting World War II. These were found in a house in France. That's all we know about them. Here's photos from the Warsaw Ghetto to match the one that started the story map with. You can see in armband again, carrying their belongings. Now, what's interesting about these photographs is I found these online as well, and I looked at our copies in the library, and I don't know if ours were the originals or photocopies that somebody took like in the 60s. You know, like going up to an actual photograph and taking the photograph of it and then turning it over to our collection. I have no idea, but that's part of the collection here. And then just to give you an idea, this is a map of the concentration work camps at the time of the World War II at their peak. So now we're going to get into the displays. So this is Mayor Ginsburg. I did a lot of research on him. He's the guy that lives in this box. I did a lot of genealogical research on him because the documentation we had on him was that, you know, he was born in this year, he went here, he survived the Holocaust, all his family died, and he came to the US. That's it. So I wanted to find out, well, who were his family? Where do they live? What did he do afterward? Where did he end up in the United States? So I spent some time making this little map. So it's interactive. You can go and click on it and start with the green dot. And it tells you that he was born in Warsaw. To his mother and father, Joseph Yosel and Sophia Ginsburg. He had two older brothers, a younger brother, and an older sister. They lived in Warsaw. Warsaw at that time had about greater than a third of the population was Jewish. Warsaw, or Poland, spilled over into Lithuania. They don't have the hard boundaries that we have now. So they would move back and forth between them. And it was at that time he went and got his degree as a physician. I found out where they lived. I lived in apartment 6 on a street I can't pronounce. And then he moved to a little town afterwards, but eventually he ended up in Vilnius or Wilno. He was found, his family stayed. He was sent to a concentration camp in the Kluge labor camp. He escaped, and he escaped just in the right time because not too long after he had escaped, the Russians on their advance were coming, and the Germans liquidated the camp in a particularly gruesome manner. So it said he lived in like a hut, like in the basement of a peasant. He fell into with the partisans fighting against the Nazis. He made his way back to Lithuania, could not find any family members, went to Germany. The US said, you've got to go back to your home country to be repatriated. So he went back to his home country for 3 days, went back to Germany, traveled all throughout Germany. In Munich, I don't know if you can see that, he got married. There's a picture of his wife. They ended up going to Paris, staying in Paris for a while. And after 6 or 7 years, he was able to board the SS United States from France and sail to the US. And what I learned when I was doing this research was the United States, that was like a premier cruise line. That wasn't like, you know, the SS Minnow or anything. That was like top of the line. So I guess he either was sponsored by family or continued working as a physician and was able to get enough funds to go and make his way to the United States, a place he initially did not want to go, but he was convinced, and it talks about that in here. He had a number of correspondences with rabbis who were coming to visit the camps and the displaced persons camps, convinced him to come and go to the US. So after that, he makes his way, that's a long line, to New York. And the last thing I could find was I found a yearbook for the faculty of the New York University School of Medicine that listed him. And then also there were a number of patents filed in the late 60s by him, presumably, to help people that were paraplegics. But that's it. There's like no other record, no death notices, nothing I can find. So feel free, please, go down the rabbit hole like I went down, and you can explore his life. Gerda Pfeffer, this one interesting in its own account. My life in Germany before and after 1933. This was a contest hosted by Harvard University in the 1939s to get correspondents from all over the world, specifically those from Germany, but that were now living abroad, and talk about what it was like. So it was one of our few documents that we have, except it's all in German. So I've tried using Google Translator to get some pieces out of it. Not a lot, but it's an interesting piece of history. Let me see what else. Yeah, I think I'll end it there because we're getting into the genocide studies collection. This is just a map of the recognized genocide, but we've got a lot of material in the USF Special Collections that documents or talks about this subject area. So anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
First, that's very well done story about how long did it take you to go through the process of creating the story map from inception through sketching it out, how you wanted it to flow to actually
The part that took the longest bit of time was the part on Ginsburg, making his map and going back and like documenting and researching these various genealogy websites to try to figure out where his family was and what happened to them, and cross-checking. Names change by spellings depending on who was it. Was it a Polish person writing it, inputting it? Was it a Lithuanian? Was it a Soviet? All that changes the spelling and makes it more difficult to track down. But I want to say I probably started it in October of last year and worked steadily through December to get it done. Okay. Yes.
Do you have any other story maps that you've put together or future plans of areas of study that you'd like to display in this format?
Yeah, we have a collection on Anglo-Irish history, and I would like to take a look at that and see what I can pull together. I haven't delved into it that much, but maybe something on the troubles of Ireland that might be interested. Yeah, it just depends. Yes. Where can they access this? It's supposed to go on our exhibitions page of the USF Special Collections, but it hasn't been posted yet. So it'll eventually live there as well. Anything else? Okay, thanks.